thank you very much for joining us once again, and welcome back to our second session. And we're very privileged to have with us Dr. Beth Morgan. Dr. Beth Morgan has a very extensive experience in policy and industry working across the AEC industry. She's currently engaged in a wide range of projects relating to the digital transformation of the construction industry and the built environment. She is the founding partner of Digital Outlook, and she is currently also engaged in teaching digital transformation in different universities in the UK. So let me introduce to you Dr. Beth Morgan to speak with us about the digital transformation in the construction industry. Dr. Morgan?
Thank you very much, Brian. Much appreciated. I should just explain that Brian is going to stay with us during this session. He's actually controlling my slides, which unfortunately, I think Nick had the same issue that you can't do from an iPad, which I'm on. So that's why. So good morning, everybody. Pleasure to be here again. I'm going to be talking about, originally my title was Establishing Digital Leadership, Project Firms and Supply Chains. Actually, I've decided to simplify that somewhat and talk about digital leadership, the what, why and how. So I will be saying next regularly throughout this. So next, please, Brian. So I'll be looking at what digital leadership is, why it's important, and then how you can be a more successful digital leader. And specifically, I'll be looking at some of the do's and don'ts of digital leadership, which have come out of some recent work we've been doing. So I'll try and leave about 10 minutes at the end if people have any questions. So this is an area that we've really started looking at more in Digital Outlook. Next, please, Brian. So just before I begin, actually, a bit about me. As Brian kindly said in his introduction, I research and teach widely around digitalization in the built environment. I last presented to you or joined you in 2019 in Lausanne. Obviously, the world has changed since then. But what I was talking about in Lausanne was how we're thinking about digitalization. And one of the things that came out of that piece of work that I did with a couple of colleagues at UCL, University College London, is that we're thinking a lot about projects. We're thinking a lot about how the industry is changing. We're not thinking very much about individuals. So as a result of that project and other bits of work, we've become increasingly interested about one particular stream of individuals, highly influential, which are digital leaders. So I'm going to talk more about that. So firstly, overview of what leadership is. So all of you will have opinions about this, and there's a huge amount of debate, scholarly debate about this. Academics have talked about it, but hopefully you'll recognize what Helen Shane said in 2008, which is that leadership is about motivating, it's about influencing, and it's about directing. So that's leadership in general. Next, please. So a very wise woman, that was me, once recognized that leadership is this core competence, something that is absolutely vital in driving digital transformation. And it wasn't just this wise woman, it was many other people and many other academics and researchers who've also identified the importance of leadership. It's quite interesting in digitalization, we tend to talk a lot and think a lot about hard technical skills, how you use technologies and what skills are required for that. And all of you will recognize that. What we attend to or give less attention to is soft skills in like leadership. And soft skills are always sort of slightly secondary considerations, but they're absolutely vital in terms of how we achieve change and how organisations perform. Next, please, Brian. So just to bear out that it wasn't just me who said that digital leadership is a core competence that we need. There's a diagram that I've pulled out here for you from MIT Sloan Management Review. So if you're not familiar with that publication, I really recommend having a look at it. It's a really good balance between academic and practitioner press. It's it's very worthy in many ways. So they really clearly identified this leadership gap. So if you look at the yellow line, that is organisations that don't have good digital leaders. The red line, in contrast, is ones that do. And if you look at the horizontal axis, it looks at early developing and maturing organisations. So we all want to aspire to be digitally mature organisations. And you can clearly see that on the right-hand side of the screen, the red line, so those organisations that have digital leaders, good digital leaders, tend to be more digitally mature. And there's a really clear distinction there. So digital leadership is important in realising digitalisation. And I meant to say at the beginning of the presentation, I know the theme of your conference is construction, the new normal, and there are many different takes on what that might be. But what I and many others are confident about is that digital and digitalisation is going to underpin that new normal, whether we're looking at sustainability, whether we're looking at collaboration, and so on and so on. Digital is going to underpin that. Next, please, Brian. So the other question that we're interested in is, I open this presentation by saying this is leadership. This is what we think about as leadership. And all of you will have different views about what's important. But the same people, so this is in MIT Sloan Management Review, they said they really were going into this question, is digital leadership different? What's different about digital leadership and traditional leadership? And they undertook this really substantial survey. So these are good, robust results. And the article, by the way, is referenced at the bottom if you want to go into more detail about that. And Brian, maybe we could share that reference if people want to look at it more clearly. Oh, no, previous slide, please. Previous slide, please, Brian. Thank you. So I've just pulled out some of the top 3 aspects, unique challenges of digital leadership. So they're looking at the pace of business. That's different. That's different in a digital environment. And we all recognize that we have this accelerating speed, the rate of change is getting faster. Digital leaders need a different culture and mindset. So you're really looking at creativity, learning, risk-taking, and I'll talk a bit more about those. And lastly, and this, I have to say, this survey was undertaken pre-COVID, this is probably even more important now, is you're leading in a flexible and distributed workplace. So we have all become very familiar very quickly with what that means, and the implications of that are going to go on. Next slide, please, Brian. So having looked at those 2 questions, we were really looking at digital leadership in the construction industry and the ability for people to upgrade their skills in this area and to improve their digital leadership skills was really lacking. And there was this huge digital leadership gap that we saw as being absolutely vital to achieving digital transformation that we so badly need. And it was really interesting actually listening to Hargeet's previous presentation about BIM, which was a very good practical explanation of this is how we use BIM and this is why we should use BIM. But it's also worth reflecting on the fact that actually BIM started being used in the built environment industry in the early 2000s. So we're now in 2020. We have to get faster at this. And we see this transformation, this change process, and we see this as absolutely critical to that. So I set up Digital Outlook as a partnership with my colleague from University College London, Dr. Eleni Papandonikolaki, who I believe has taught at ICPMA in past years. And this is a teaching method that has been used at Harvard Business. It was actually pioneered at Harvard Business School over 100 years ago and is really widely used at business schools around the globe recently. And indeed, many of you will have come across it. And many of you will be familiar with its guiding principles, which is it flips the traditional teaching scenario. So you are not a lecturer, you're not standing in front of students telling them all about various things. It's very much about taking an alternative role. So instead of being the sage on the stage, the wise person telling everybody, you know, what theory is and what academics are thinking about, you really adopt this role of the guide on the side. And they're highly interactive sessions and they focus on managerial dilemmas. So this is, next slide please, Brian. So I'm going to just briefly give you an example of some of the work we've been doing around that. The teaching case, we did some work with Thames Tideway, which is for those who aren't familiar, is a large mega project in London, enhancing the existing large sewerage system in London, which was created over 100 years ago. And it's a massive project. And we worked with them to develop a teaching case, which was looking at digital evolution, Tideway's digital evolution. And next slide, please, Brian. We then taught it to some 90 executives. So these were people identified by the company as being potential leaders or existing leaders. And we mixed them up all together. And you can see here, it was all delivered online, small group discussions. And we were looking at different aspects of digital leadership. And I'm going to talk about some of the results. This was all very recent, so this is its first outing. Some of the things that came out of those sessions. Next slide, please, Brian. So I've talked about this as the do's and don'ts for digital leaders. And I'm just going to use the remaining time. What time is it? How much longer have I got left? Oh, got 10 minutes left. So I'm going to talk through some of these. So some of the do's: learn from industry-wide technology advances and apply them to your own situation. So focus on collaboration, and collaboration is a really important aspect of using digital technologies effectively. I don't know how many of you have come across the phrase that they're unbounded innovations, but to use increasingly to use digital technologies effectively, you need collaboration. You need to work across boundaries, be that across the boundaries in your firm, in your project. You're probably working across other industries now. So that is absolutely vital, and leaders play a vital role in facilitating that. You need to recognize, encourage, and support digital champions within your organization. So a lot of you probably recognize these sorts of people, digital champions. So they're those rare people who are technologically gifted, or if you want to use a more derogatory term, maybe geeks. And they combine that with business skills. So they're able to explain and appreciate what's going on in the business. So these are really key people that need encouraging. In other streams of risk management research, they're called lead users. So as a leader, digital leader in an organization, you are really, it's really important that you recognize and encourage these individuals. The fourth point was around understanding and accepting the limit of your own expertise and knowledge. So this is a key point, especially as many traditional leaders of firms are perhaps more senior, perhaps often have less digital knowledge or less digital know-how. And it's really important that you understand that you take responsibility for developing a level of digital literacy, but also that you trust others within your organization. And they're often more junior people and younger people, that you understand and support and accept them to do their own work. Fifthly, lead by example. So, you know, if you want people to follow you, if you want to change, if you want to develop BIM use within your organization, you have to do it. Next slide, please, Brian. Brian, actually, could you just tell me how much longer have I got? I'm losing it a bit on timings here.
Yeah, this is the 12th of 15 slides.
And how much longer have I got time-wise on your schedule?
You still have 13 minutes.
Okay,
10
great,
to 13
thank
minutes.
you. All right, thanks very much, Brian. So a few more do's, and then I'll move on to the don'ts. So this is really important. Show a willingness to try new things. So support your staff in taking risks and encourage creative and innovative use of technologies. This is really important for leaders to do. Any new digital technology or any innovative use of a digital technology is going to involve risk. That's an absolutely implicit part of innovation, is increased risk. You're doing something for the first time. You, as a leader, you need to support your staff to feel comfortable in taking those risks. They're not going to be left to hang out to dry if things don't work. And you have to be really comfortable with failure, because failure is going to happen. So this is a really key point in an industry that remains very firmly focused on short-term profit making. And that's how we talk to our clients. So this is a really key point for digital leaders. The third point, use your experience to identify the business issues that technology may help. So technology is a tool. It is the solution to a business problem, and it has to be used as such. We can't get carried away by what technology can do, because technology can do some amazing things. And I have been guilty of sort of, you know, we've all been in that situation where you look at a new technology, and I call it the slack-jawed phenomenon of technology. So when you go, oh, wow, you can do that. But the reality is, as a digital leader, you have to invest in technologies that actually are going to help your business and address a business issue. So remain focused on the need to see technology as a tool. And then the last point is around clearly identifying and articulating the benefits of technology in your organization. Next slide, please, Brian. So some do nots for digital leaders, and you could flip these round and they become do's for digital leaders. But in our sessions with Tideway and Skanska, these are points that came out as familiar, things that often happen, people had experienced a lot in organizations. So some of the common pitfalls that digital leaders often do is they fail to consider the cost, time and resources of implementation of technology. So when they're looking at digital investments, they just look at the cost and benefit of investing in that technology, and they underestimate what it's going to take to actually implement that technology. And that's where the value is created, in its use. And we have to attend more to that process, the change and the training that is going to be required for implementation. They fail to consider some of the intangible and longer term benefits of technology. So when we are investing in new technology, we often don't know what the effects are going to be, and leaders have to become comfortable with that. This constant need to pin down exactly what and measure what the benefits are going to be sometimes ignores the fact that we don't know what the benefits are going to be, and there are going to be longer term benefits way beyond the life of the project, or the handover of the project, the built asset. Fourthly, understanding the importance of bottom-up initiatives in catalysing digital innovations. So this is really important, and I spoke before about this junior-senior dilemma in digital leadership versus digital literacy. A lot of good ideas are going to come from the bottom of an organisation, or are going to come from more junior members of the project team. And that can be a really important source of digital innovation. And leaders tend to focus often on top-down processes of innovation. And actually, those bottom-up initiatives in digitalization are really important. Next slide, please, Brian. So some final do nots is that leaders often adopt a solution looking for a problem approach to digitalization, rather start with the business problem itself. So this goes back to what I was saying about the slack-jawed phenomenon in technology. Often it's a technology that is the starting point, and this wow thing, rather than it being firmly tied in with business problems and business issues. And many of you will recognize this. There's often a failure to own the technological change, to champion it. And that is really important. You can't have digital leaders who invest in a digital innovation, support the investment, and then walk away from it. The process carries on. You have the implementation process, and it's really important that digital leaders champion that as well. So neglecting your own levels of digital know-how, a lot of you will recognize this. Digital leaders, and this is different to traditional leaders, they need this high level of digital literacy. Without that, you won't be able to make informed investment decisions. But as I said before, it's also important to recognize the limits of that digital know-how. The next point refers to the supply chain, which is incredibly important and could be a whole other talk, which I'm not going into detail today. So we did a lot of work with Skanska around digital leadership in its supply chain. And that was all about cohesion and buy-in and collaboration. And then the last point, which the do not for digital leaders, is this failure to provide clear requirements and vision. So that's really important. Have this vision, own it, and be the person who champions it in the organisation. So that was my final slide. If you go on next, thank you very much. As that says, that is the end. Brian, if we've got time for if people have got any questions, I think we've got some time for that.
Yeah, we have one right now. But before I read it, we encourage everyone to post your questions in the Q&A, or better yet, if you can raise your hands and ask your questions directly. So, the first question is coming from Nick Smith, and he says, "I am really interested in the digital champions you mentioned. What needs to be done to make them even more effective and perhaps less geeky?"
Okay, thanks, Nick. So it's about recognition. It's about recognizing these people and their importance within the organization. So I did a lot of research in one organization as it was adopting a new digital technology. And all too often, these digital champions were being used as, they referred to themselves as question monkeys. So they were the people who everybody else in the organization turned to with these really mundane questions about, well, how do I do this? How do I do that? And they were becoming very frustrated with that. So all too often, that is the role they take. I contrast that, Nick, with, so there was an example in the same organization where one leader really was approached by people who you would call as digital champions, a couple of people who were incredibly enthusiastic, and they wanted to undertake this project, very experimental project, which they wanted to work on with Imperial College in London. So it was actually around modelling a human body using BIM. Very experimental. And the leader listened to them, said, yes, this is a really good idea, and then supported them the whole way through so that they could actually work on that and realise that project. And that involves things like getting money for them, releasing them from their day job so they had a bit of spare capacity to work on that, supporting them when they were trying to build their team. So they had a team, they ended up with a team of about 10 engineers who were working on this. So that's a really, and then at the end of the project, really celebrated it. So got avenues for them to present it to the board, got avenues for them to host international conferences and talk about their work, supported them to go and talk about it at external conferences. And it became something, and it was integrated into their performance review. So that's another really important way of incentivizing individuals. So those are just some of the practical ways that we can support digital leaders can support these champions, these lead users, so they're not geeks, so they're actually used. Thank you for the question.
Okay, we have another one from Dr. Bhargav Dave. Where do you think we are as an industry when it comes to digital leadership?
I would say, so if I go back to, thank you for the question, if I go back to the slide, the MIT slide that showed the digital leadership gap, and then it showed various stages of digital maturity across organizations, I would say we're on the left-hand side. I don't know, I'd be interested if you agree with that. So you've got early, developing and maturing organizations, that's along the x-axis, and this pronounced leadership gap, I think we're probably around 2 or 3 in that early stage of it. Do you agree?
Okay.
I don't know if you can. Yeah. Maybe in your talk next, you can tell me whether you agree with that or not.
Okay. Okay. We have another one. Oh, Dr. Bhargav says yes, he agrees. So
okay, good.
So we have another one from Mika Lindholm. We in Finland are very interested about data-driven construction. We are also planning a master program related to the topic. Do you think that the digital leadership should be part of the education too?
Yes, I would say that. I think it's such a critical area, and I should say that I've focused on digital leadership within organizations here. Of course, we see digital leadership in many other places, but just because of time constraints, I focused on that one particular area, which which is how people traditionally see digital leaders. I think that digital leadership can make such a critical difference in organizations and projects performance that it absolutely has to be part of any education looking at this area.
Okay, we have another one from Christina. Oh, okay. Does the digitalization in construction mean mainly BIM processes for you, or what else is included here? Any new trends we should focus on beyond BIM?
There are many other technologies that are starting to be adopted in the construction industry. So many of you will be familiar with sort of robotics, artificial intelligence. Off the top of my head, I've gone a bit. And other things. All of these require behavioural changes. So I covered many of them to do with collaboration. That's a really key one. To do with seeing technology as a business tool. I would say that is a behavioural change. To do with our understanding of value. So not just looking economic value and also looking environmental and social value. So there are many other technologies. They require many behavioural changes. I think in the academic community believe that BIM is going to be a platform for many of these technologies. So they're all interconnected. So the information you get in a BIM model is going to inform the uses of other technologies. So I tried to give a relatively succinct answer to what is a really complex issue there. There's a really nice report from the Network Plus around the use of digital platforms in construction. It's largely UK, but I think definitely has applicability actually to an international audience.
Okay, so there's a comment from Mika. Yeah, they're going to do it. So
okay, great.
I also have a question, Dr. Beth. We know for a fact that the construction industry is lagging behind its industry siblings like mining and manufacturing in terms of the level of digitalization. And not only the current levels, but even the growth rate or the growth by which we adopt technologies are much slower. So what will it take pandemic aside, because the pandemic, while it accelerates the level of digitalization, we don't want for it to be around for long. So pandemic aside, how do we push this forward that the industry really at least reaches the level of its peers, like the manufacturing industry?
Again, Brian, thanks for the question. That's a big question. And I suppose there are a few responses I have to that immediately. One is, I don't know. I think that's what this discussion is all about. I know that what I've been talking about today, the digital leadership, is incredibly important, as are many other hard and soft skills. And soft skills is a funny phrase, and it sort of automatically makes them secondary considerations. So those factors are there. The second scenario, and there are indications that this is happening perhaps, is that market forces are going to just take over. So that if you don't do it, if you don't adopt digital transformation, you are going to become disrupted to such an extent that you won't be able to operate anymore. And increasingly, we're seeing new entrants from other markets come into, like Google, like IBM, like Legal & General, and that's a pension provider in the UK, like John Lewis, they're a UK company, like IKEA, come into the area of the built environment and say this is a market that we can get involved in, because there are many improvements, there's much room for improvement, and the traditional construction firms are not going to be able to compete against them. So that is another scenario.
Okay. Yeah, we encourage. Thank you, Dr. Beth, for that answer, and
Thank you.
We encourage our audience to send your questions. Though we will see Dr. Beth again in the Q&A, which is the Q. Are you going to join us again, Dr. Beth? Okay,
Yeah.
that's great. Yeah, so we will have her again in the open forum, which is at 7:25 p.m. in the Philippines, and that's 12:25 Central European time. So, okay. So, are there other questions? Oh, I think there's none at the moment. How about from Hargit? You can join us now. You can unhide yourself. Any questions for Dr.
Yes, I have one. I was going to ask in the open forum, but I've got a chance, so I can ask right now. So first of all, a wonderful presentation. Actually, you talked about the elephant in the room that we have been talking about. I have a question. So we see nowadays that there are so many startups. You think of an application and you have a startup for there already. So this kind of leadership and digitalization is definitely required in small companies or the startups. So what is your opinion about that? How do you think that can be applied in small startups?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. So digitalization is turning many things on its head in incumbent organizations, big incumbent organizations. It's turning the traditional hierarchies on its head. And as you've referred to in SMEs, small and medium enterprises, it's making them more viable because they're able to take risks, be creative, and they can change. They're much more agile organizations. So often they're incredibly small. Often they're one person, one-man bands. So digital leadership there is slightly different because you're not looking so much at how you lead in your organization. You're looking at how you demonstrate leadership across your supply chain or your network of other organizations. And again, I come back to that word collaboration. It's the way you work across boundaries, your willingness to share information, your ability to work with other professions from other industries and other cultures. All of these things are incredibly important. So that's an area that we're becoming increasingly interested in, is around SMEs and what their role in this whole process. Because initially the rhetoric was very much, well, SMEs are disadvantaged because they can't afford the software and they can't afford the training. But the other side to it is they're much more agile. They can start up, they can do different things very quickly.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for the question, Hagit.
Okay, so it's exactly 6:30. It's exactly 6:30, or that's 11:30 CET. So we're going to end this session, and we thank you very much, Dr. Beth, for joining us, and we look forward to having you again later in the day for our open forum. So
thank you all very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. And a few more announcements. So we would like to get your feedback for every session, and I have posted in the feed. I have posted the link where you can provide your feedback, because this will be, hopefully this will be an annual thing, and we of course we'd like to improve every part of what we do in the summit. So your feedback will matter very much to us. So thank you once again, and we hope to see you in the next session. Thank you.